Oh, misty eye of the mountain below, keep careful watch of my brother's soul. And should the sky be filled with fire and smoke, keep watching over during sun. One of the best moments that I remember going to a movie theater and enjoying a movie was The Desolation of Smaug. And at the very end of the movie, they cut it off, and they have this moment where Bilbo says, "What have we done?" And then that song starts. I had no idea there was Ed Sheeran. I had no idea what the song was, but it just flowed so beautifully. If you haven't gotten the indication, we are going to be reading The Hobbit. Some of you will rejoice. Some of you are weeping right now because you're like my wife and you just don't have an imagination. She really did hate reading this book, but only because she didn't understand what it looked like. I think that watching a movie for her probably would have helped her quite a bit when when we were in high school. When we were in high school, though, it was 2004. I think when we read this, and the movie didn't come out until 2012. And The Lord of the Rings actually just started being released right around that time. And when we read The Hobbit, I was really excited because I was familiar with Lord of the Rings and I was familiar with uh, the fantasy genre. In fact, it was my go-to genre. I really enjoyed it. And I still do. I really do enjoy fantasy. And this video should serve as a little introduction for you on what to expect when it comes to The Hobbit and kind of what to expect from the class as well as we get going. But to put it briefly, The Hobbit is a novel. It's written by a guy named J.R.R. Tolkien, and it was written a little after, I think it was like early, like 1950s. It was his first book. Lord of the Rings did not come first. It was The Hobbit that was the first book. The Hobbit was intended as a children's book. It was intended to be a fantasy children's book, and it was the first of its kind. Very few people had attempted to write in the fantasy genre and write towards children. But he just wrote it so well and with such character and such humor that people demanded more Hobbit books. They wanted more. So in a way, Lord of the Rings is kind of the sequel to The Hobbit, even though the movies are kind of messed up. The Lord of the Rings came first, and then The Hobbit came second. There are 3 trilogies of movies. I recommend Lord of the Rings. It's much better. The Hobbit just seemed really long and drug out, and it was really unfortunate because the Hobbit book, in my opinion, is a better read. It's an easier read, and it's more fun than reading Lord of the Rings. If you're a big fantasy nerd like I am, then Lord of the Rings is right up your alley. It's good. But we will be reading The Hobbit. We're not going to be reading the super heavy stuff like Lord of the Rings. Why are we reading this? Funny you should ask right now. Because Tolkien himself has a famous quote about using fantasy and literature to escape, almost like we use movies and video games to escape. The difference, though, is that literature pushes us to realms of imagination that seeing something can't do. Where if someone can write well enough and they can describe the world using their words, you get to fill in the blanks and you get to fill up this world with this imagination that you have. And it pushes your imagination further. And what better time to be challenged to push our imagination further than when we're going to be trapped inside for a month or more. Who knows? Okay? But regardless, I want you to see the value in this. The value is that not only do we get to use this to kind of take us on a journey when we can't go anywhere, not only do we get to escape from our current circumstances, it also gives us lessons to learn from the characters, like any other story. Fantasy is just incredibly spectacular because we get to explore new worlds and discover new creatures, and it's this fun. It's just all about having fun. So I wanted to introduce a little bit to you as far as The Hobbit goes, and as far as what this unit is going to be about. This is your introductory video. There is an article that's also included with this video. The article is titled Of Fairy Stories, or On Fairy Stories, and it's written by Tolkien himself. I believe this was written right around the same time, if not a little after, he was writing The Hobbit. So this whole entire piece, this article, or essay, it's more like an essay, is lengthy, but it's all about why he chose to go into fantasy and why he chose to take such a weird path of storytelling. Because back in the day, when he wrote this, fantasy was not a popular genre. It was not all the rage like it is today. Superhero movies and fantasy big budget movies like Lord of the Rings were not a thing back then. It was meant to be very realistic. Things like Gone with the Wind were kind of mainstream, and realism had kind of taken hold, and no one was really interested in exploring new worlds. They were kind of over it. They had war, or they had just finished a war, and they were ready to kind of embrace realistic life again. They didn't want battles and fights. But Tolkien explored this new realm, and he wanted to bring us into this world that he imagined, that he called Middle-earth. And this is just a really cool story. It's a really cool world, and it's worth diving into. So here's what I would like you to do. I'd like you to read his article. I'm going to give you both today and tomorrow and the weekend to read it and respond to the few questions that I'll post along with this video and along with the article. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can text me. I'll include my phone number. You can email me. You can always do that through Google Classroom. But just be sure that you are not only being drawn in, but also understanding why. And he's going to talk about this in the article. He's going to talk about why fantasy, right? Like, what's the point? And people need to understand that fantasy is meant to be not only an escape, but a means of which to also understand our world through another world, where things might be a little more physical and a little less gray and a little more black and white. When you meet a character, you know that he's good. When you meet a character, you know that he's evil. It's kind of nice and easy to learn lessons and to tell stories and to include a message when things are so taken at their face. And The Hobbit is great for that. So enjoy, read the article. Don't dive into the text yet. If you haven't gotten the book, get the book. There are plenty of copies at the school. You can pick up a copy at the school. If you don't have a copy, or if you can't go to the school, or the school's closed, or you think, oh man, I don't want to expose myself to all the terrible things like germs, I get it. But stop by the school, let them know that you're coming, and they can get you a book. If you can't, like you don't have the ability, then you can find it online. You can download a digital copy from Amazon. It's going to cost you, but it's your responsibility to get the book. There are books at the school. Get it. Okay, this is our first assignment. This is the way that we're going to dive in, but you need to be ready to start the book next week. Okay? If you have any questions, let me know, and enjoy.